Thanks again for joining us for Listening to America, a conversation with author Ryan Bernsten. Ryan wrote a book called 50 States of Mind, A Journey to Rediscover American Democracy, to share his account of a 23,000-mile journey across 50 states to answer the question, is America divided? We're going to introduce Ryan in just a moment. I want to just express to everybody that this is a conversation. And so please be prepared to share your voices and be part of the conversation, ask questions. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. We at Hull No Place for Hate like to start our meetings and gatherings with a land acknowledgement. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the microphone back over to Deb Baer for just a moment to do that. I don't know where Deb went. While we're waiting for Deb to come back, I will go ahead and share.
Sorry, here I am. Sorry.
Hey, Deb. No problem. Go right ahead.
All right, I did have my land acknowledgement. It has disappeared. Hold on, I'm sorry. Okay.
It's a land acknowledgement if it's not delayed. Is that the American way?
Exactly. All right, exactly. I found it. This is a land acknowledgement that we typically start our Hull No Place for Hate meetings with. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Massachusetts tribe, the tribe of indigenous peoples from whom the colony, province, and Commonwealth of Massachusetts have taken their name. I would like to pay my respect to the ancestral bloodline of the Massachusetts tribe and their descendants, who still inhabit traditional ancestral Massachusetts tribe territories to this day. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. For those of us who might not be too familiar with Hull No Place for Hate, I thought I'd also just share our mission statement. We are a nonpartisan town committee that's dedicated to building bridges of understanding within our community. We seek to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion among all people. It is our goal to unite people to promote a just and inclusive community, provide support and education on diversity, and celebrate our differences. So we thought that would be important to share that with you. Some protocols for Zoom. Most of us have had plenty of practice using Zoom, but just as a reminder, we'd like you to keep yourselves muted until you're going to be sharing a question. When we get to the part where people are asking questions, there are two ways you can identify yourself as someone who wants to ask a question. One way is to simply put your hand up physically. With that, though, we'd need your camera on. The other way is to go to the bottom of your screen. There is a little smiley face and the word reactions. You click on that, and then you see a little bar at the bottom with a hand like this. It says raise hand, and you can see my hand is raised up in the corner. Since most of us are going to have our cameras off for a while, let's go ahead and stick with the actual icon instead of physically raising our hands. If you want to turn your video on when you're talking with the group, please feel free to do so. It'd be nice to see who's here. And in terms of the chat, we are monitoring questions in the chat as well. So please know that if you're typing a question and you only see it going to one person, don't worry. We will make sure that your question is addressed. Also, a reminder that sometimes we forget to put our hands down when we're using that little icon. So there is a little reminder at the bottom of your screen that says lower hand. So my hand is up, and now I just hit lower hand. So with that, we are ready to get started. So I would like to introduce Ron Bernsten. We're very excited to have you here, Ron.
Hello, everybody. What a treat this is. And just hearing about Hull, No Place for Hate makes me feel like I'm among kindred spirits right here. The work that you all are doing in your community to make sure that every voice matters and important conversations are had, it inspires me a lot. I was asked at a event last week at a high school in Plano, Texas, by students, if I had unlimited funds, what would I do to fix political polarization in America? And my answer was essentially creating bodies like this one, where we can have difficult but important conversations. We can get together in person or on Zoom in a judgment-free, cancel-free conversation giving way. And so I just want to say that the work you're doing here is important for our democracy, and I am incredibly honored to be here. I want to give a shout out to Paula, who does amazing work, and we met at the Hingham Library this summer on my book tour. So thank you, Paula, for making this happen and inviting me here. So I always say in these talks that you are going to walk out teaching me more than you're probably going to learn from me. And the reason I say that is I'm not here to talk at you or even just answer your questions. I want to turn the tables back on you and ask you questions and get conversation going, because that is where the magic, and I really do mean magic, happens. Last week, I was at the World Affairs Council in Dallas, Fort Worth, which is actually a pretty conservative area and a conservative leaning council. And the conversation that happened both at the event, but at the Young Professionals event after, left me completely gobsmacked. We talked about everything. Nothing was off the table. We had multiple immigrants who were there. We had multiple LGBTQ people who were there. We had multiple conservatives that were there. And they expected me to sort of, give a talk and, make it a very safe space for them to stay quiet and listen to me. But instead, I turned it around to them and I asked them 3 questions that I will ask you tonight. And the common ground we found and the broadening of each other's minds was pretty spectacular. So I'm excited to have that same opportunity here tonight with you. I like to start by reading the preface of my book, 50 States of Mind, A Journey to Rediscover American Democracy, because I think it just gives a nice overview of what I did and why I did it before we jump into questions. And I promise not to take too long or put you to sleep. So this is the preface of 50 States of Mind. The pulse of America is elusive. There is no steady beat. There is only the erratic rhythm of a people with very little shared history, constantly rediscovering how to live together. Despite this, I, a staffer from a failed 2016 presidential campaign, read Democracy in America in graduate school, found inspiration in Alexis de Tocqueville's travels, and decided to follow in his footsteps nearly 180 years after his book's publication. I hit the road to talk to Americans of all stripes. With a grant for my graduate program at the University of Oxford, I drove 23,257 miles to visit over 150 cities, towns, and villages in all 50 states. I wanted to find answers to the defining questions of the era. Does American democracy still work? Can we still coexist peacefully? Amidst the horror of national headlines, I wasn't expecting to find something optimistic on the ground. I wasn't expecting to have to question my own place in our democracy, and I certainly wasn't expecting to find myself living somewhere new at the end of it. After the 2016 election, I wanted to understand the complicated country I lived in and where I fit into it. The question of what it means to be an American has always been difficult in a country so full of various cultures and viewpoints, let alone during such a polarized time. To accurately portray America's staggering diversity, I pushed myself to meet people from all walks of life. My mission was to listen, not teach, to learn, not lecture. And my only methodology was the desire to find someone unlike anyone else I had met before. I stayed in the homes of people across the country who opened their doors to me. In turn, I responded with an open mind and a generous ear. If I hadn't, this trip would not have been possible. This mindset also gave me space to learn what I didn't know about the diverse perspectives across our country. I found a surprising amount of common ground, and it became my belief that building bridges, even with those with whom we initially seemed to disagree, could be our last line of defense against a quickly radicalizing society. The breakdown of candid dialogue benefited only the powers profiting off our division and outrage, lest we realize how much we actually agree on. The late great Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, crystallized the dangers of our political environment in her book, Fascism, A Warning. At many levels, contempt has become a defining characteristic of American politics. It makes us unwilling to listen to what others say, unwilling, in some cases, even to allow them to speak. This stops the learning process cold and creates a ready-made audience for demagogues who know how to bring diverse groups of the aggrieved together in righteous opposition to everyone else. With her words in mind, I consciously tried to rid myself of any vestige of self-righteousness or contempt as I allowed my preconceived notions to be challenged by my fellow Americans. I hope you'll have your preconceived notions challenged too. Only then can we see what is within the bounds of normalcy and what is dangerous extremism, and be able to recognize the latter when we see it. Ultimately, American democracy is made up of unique states of mind and stories that inform every citizen's worldview. By deciding to start with the people, I was reminded that America is a community existing together in a shared moment with far more in common than that which divides us. We have so much to learn from each other. I hope this book can take you on a journey to challenge your understanding of the United States through the small interactions I had with people all across the nation. By offering a sampling of the staggering diversity in America, I hope you experience the wonders, contradictions, oddities, and thrills of 50 very different states of mind. That's the preface, and if my voice is already getting on your nerves, I do not recommend the audiobook because it's about 7.5 hours of that.
Thank you, Ryan. Why don't I go ahead and start us off with a few questions? As you started out on your journey, you had mentioned that you wanted to go to visit the different states without bias. And I'm wondering, what was the hardest sort of preconception that you had to sort of overcome, or did you have any experiences like that?
Yeah, I'll start with sort of the impetus for me that made me already feel comfortable going to a lot of different places is I worked on a political campaign in 2016, which is the best job in the world. I got to show up every day and talk to people about their perceptions of our democracy and their hopes and dreams for our country. And so when that dialogue was shut down and I no longer had that job, I very much fell into the trap of I'm learning about the story of America from the news, from the news feeds, from the news cycles. And I started to fall into my partisan camps. I lived in New York City before I went to Oxford, and I was very much in kind of a group think. So the thing that the campaign taught me is that people really have the potential to surprise you no matter where you go. I'm going to give a quick example of sort of a life experience that I have that taught me that you can never be too sure about people. And that's when I was in college. I was in a fraternity, and I was the only LGBTQ member of the fraternity. And there was one man who was from Utah, who was the head of the fraternity at Northwestern University, and he was just a severe man. He was no nonsense. And I was like, if this guy finds out that there is a gay member of this fraternity, he's going to flip some tables. He's going to be very upset. Of course, life went on, and I ended up bringing my boyfriend at the time to a formal, but I wanted to ask everyone's permission at the fraternity. And unfortunately, the meeting where we came together was the meeting where he was there. So I said, hey, everyone, I just want to ask your permission, make sure there's no problems with this. And I looked at his face and it was inscrutable. And later that night, he called me and said, Ryan, I just wanted to say I really admire what you did. It's really brave of you. I'm like, all right, Kent, I don't want to talk about this with you. I know you don't actually believe what you're saying. And he said, and I've never told anyone this, but my partner, Dan, and I have been together for 35 years, and I've never brought him around the house or told anybody, but it really made me think that times are changing and I need to start being more open. And sure enough, he started bringing his partner Dan around. So the reason I tell that story is that I've just learned that you can't put people in boxes. So wanting to overcome preconceived notions was actually more like, I want to overcome, I know I will, the more I travel around. And that was part of the fun for me, is I wanted to find situations that turned around my own biases on their head, whether that was the Trump supporting female immigrant I met on the New York City subway, or the lesbian couple who opened a bar in Casper, Wyoming. Those were the stories that I was really interested in hearing, because I think when we think about other regions of the country, we tend to paint with a very broad brush and ignore the nuance that's there. And the nuance is where the fun is for me.
Thank you, Ryan. So I'm going to go ahead and answer a few questions that are coming in from the rest of the audience. How did you decide what order to visit the states? And did you find that there were definite regional attitudes or interests from state to state?
What a wonderful question. Thank you for that. So it's appropriate that it's October right now, and I'm sure Massachusetts is absolutely beautiful. I know that for a fact, because that's why I decided to go to the East Coast first. I had October until March to complete this trip, and I said, I'm going to New England first because I want to see those pretty fall colors. So I actually had a really interesting experience traveling around New England and the East Coast in general, because it was 2018. It was a midterm election year. And at the time, every state I visited had a Republican governor, even though, the East Coast tends to veer a little blues. I went and there was Chris Sununu, Phil Scott, Charlie Baker at the time, Paul LePage at the time when I was in Maine. I interviewed, oh my gosh, what is her name? The current governor of Maine, Janet Mills, when she was running a few days before she ended up winning. So that was a really big draw for me, and just a very interesting way to start the trip. I start in the East Coast, and then I kind of travel to increasingly difficult, I think, parts to travel, both in terms of terrain, driving up mountains in my Toyota Prius in the winter, but also with the political conversation. I think the East Coast has quite a healthy dialogue in general, I think, between the two parties, and is able to kind of capitalize on the spirit of town hall meetings, which I feel like is very much in the fabric of East Coast civic debate. The second question is amazing, and I want to recommend a book that covers this topic exactly, called American Nations, the 11 rival tribes that basically created the different cultures in the United States. It's by Colin Woodward. And it basically breaks down, based on the people who immigrated to America, they each came with their own attitudes about society, democracy, and those attitudes very much shape the way different regions of America think about morality, democracy. So I definitely found certain trends when I was traveling around based on what I learned in that book. But I was also always looking to find someone unlike someone I had met before. I didn't want to ever talk to the same type of people over and over. So sometimes I'd be in a southern region and say, okay, I've been too many rural places. I need to spend some time in urban areas in Alabama, to sort of flip the notion that, oh, Alabama is all rural and southern, spend time in Mobile. So it was very much a decision-making process about who can connect me somewhere where I could have someone really exciting to speak about. Yes, that is it. American Nations, A History of the 11 Rival Regional Cultures of North America. That's exactly it. Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you. Okay, here's another question. Whoops, it just went away for a minute. Okay, what are the most often expressed views people across the country share about whether, and if so, how, we should be trying to eliminate hate and promote acceptance?
This is amazing. And this is one of the most nuanced words I think I discovered across the country. Hate. I think if I was staying in a more conservative home, hate has a very different meaning than if I'm staying with people who are more left leaning. I think we live in this period where people feel and often are intentionally mischaracterized. And so when people hear the word hate, people are like, well, people now hate Christians. People hate men. Because I think the same way we paint certain regions with very broad brushes, I think people can sometimes weaponize identity politics to paint certain groups with a very broad brush. And everybody, and this is the thing that unites everyone when it comes to hate, wants to be known and loved. That is the number one takeaway that I give people of what I learned across the country. People want community and they want to be known and loved. And if people feel mischaracterized, how can they feel loved? And when people feel mischaracterized, or they feel like people won't like them, they won't hear them, they won't accept them, that's when hate also starts to root, I think, in people's hearts. People are like, well, I can't ever be loved and accepted, so I'm going to start hating people. And what is the antidote to that? What is the antidote to that hate? For me, sometimes people, especially conservative people, knew that I was going to be staying in their homes, came in with their backs up. They were ready to fight about politics. They were ready to, and I always use the old mediator technique where I said, you know what? I'm going to let you talk for a while. I'm going to ask you questions. I'm not going to say anything, and I'm going to find out what is so important to you. Is it actually this political issue that you came in really hot about? Or is it you just want to feel heard? You just want to be validated. You want me to understand your point of view, where your value system came from, your upbringing. And every single time, because I know I mentioned in my book that I was staying in people's homes across the country, but when I gave someone an inch, when I said, I do see where you're coming from there, or I do understand your perspective, or I understand why you feel this way, the rest fell into place. People would agree with me on anything. If I just gave them I see you and I understand what you're talking about. And it's a very powerful thing. This is, I'm sure this question always comes up. Why do you care so much about this work, Ryan? Why is this personal to you? My brother is engaged to a woman whose politics are completely different from mine, who has beliefs that sometimes have my jaw on the floor. Very, very religious, believes that, the earth was created 2,000 years ago, things that I don't believe. Being LGBTQ is a choice. Antifa stormed the Capitol. And it's hearing all these things, I'm like, how can I actually have a dialogue with this person? And when I show up and I say, I just find one issue to say, I do understand where you're coming from. It's amazing the physical change that happens in her body, how she'll just exhale and say, okay, yes, I agree on all these other things. There are certain things that are off limits, especially when it comes to religious beliefs. I don't want to touch those. It's not my business to touch those. But when I give a little bit on political issues, I get so much more back. Hopefully that answered your question about the term hate, because it's very complicated. And the first question is, where does it come from?
Thank you for that. Did you find, or do you find, that there are more similarities or more differences among Americans?
Oh my gosh. We are so similar. We agree on maybe 85% of the issues. And, this book, at this point, I just want to throw it away. I mean, it's still a very good book, but the conversations that I have traveling around the country and, organizations like this, it's amazing what happens when you actually get people talking. For example, I was in rural Maine in a very small town called Bremen, maybe like 1,000 people. And we walk in and I'm going to preview one of the questions that I'm going to ask you later. And that's, what's something you will never change your mind about? I might as well give you the other few. It's what's something you'll never change your mind about? What's something you have changed your mind about? What's something you'd be open to changing your mind about? So keep that going in the back of your head while I tell the story here. And it was my first library visit on my book tour. And this woman raised her hand and said, I can never change my mind about that abortion is murder of an innocent human life. And I was just like, the first day, this is what I get. I need to dive into this right now. I did not have enough coffee that day. I'm like, this is going to be an absolute disaster. So her friend that she came with turned to her and said, okay, well, where is the line? Where is the line became the conversation, and they started telling stories. And the person that laid down that line about, I will never change my mind about this, ended up talking her way into what is a quite moderate stance. She ended up talking, I ended up eventually getting involved because what she was advocating for was essentially Britain's abortion laws, which is a 17-week ban with exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother, and economic circumstances, which is a multifaceted umbrella term. But that woman walked in with her friend, and it was clear that they had never talked about it. One was clearly very pro-choice, the other was very pro-life, and they had never talked about specifics. By the end of that conversation, there was no yelling, there was no anger, there was only storytelling. This is what happened to my sister. Well, this is what happened to my mother-in-law. And those stories ended up bringing us back to, where is the line? And I think that is very telling that one of the most controversial issues in American politics right now, I got to see worked out in real time before my eyes when the real conversation gets had. I don't know if you notice, we don't get to have the real conversation almost anywhere. Social media is a non-starter for changing people's mind or having a real conversation. Yeah, that's where everyone chooses to have these very hot button conversations. The Thanksgiving dinner table is not a very conducive place to have this conversation either. And so where do we have it? Where do we talk specifics? We take talking points from the news. We look to social media. We look to politicians' sound bites. But when Americans actually talk to each other, we get stuff done. So that is a very long way to say that I really believe that there is a huge consensus out there when we work for it, when we don't get distracted, when we actually have the hard conversations, and know that we are not going to change people's minds. We're not going to ever change people's minds. We can broaden people's minds. We can pull people into the orbit of our experiences and our stories. We can ask them to consider other experiences. And that's what moves the needle when changing people's hearts and minds. It's not expecting someone to think exactly like you do.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm feeling very inspired, and I'm certain that other people on the call tonight are as well. I think it would be a great idea to look and see what questions folks have this evening. I'm going to look around the room here, and I encourage any of the Hull No Place for Hate members to chime on in. I do see Paula's hand up.
Hello, Ryan. Pleasure to see you. This is a question from some of the participants here too, and I'm going to read it. What have you found to be the prevailing fears of people as they affect their perception of democracy and government? And knowing that these are two, this is another part of the question as well. How tribalistic is America?
That's very good. That's a very good question. I think the greatest fear for everybody, and I always fear when I have these conversations that people see it through one particular lens. It really goes both ways. I think this is the way everyone feels, that there is not a place for me in America. That I think is everyone's greatest fear, that America does not want someone with a lifestyle like mine, that looks like me, with my beliefs, and that I am ultimately in danger of having my life being erased. Think of it from the perspective of the small town farmer in rural Nebraska. Think of it from the trans person living in a red state. I think the common fear is America does not have a place for me. America does not accept me. And I think we get those fears played into because in many cases, they are valid. But sometimes it's the media narrative. You know, the media wants us to be afraid. The media likes when we're afraid because we donate money to politicians. Politicians like us to be afraid and paint an apocalyptic future if the other person wins because it helps them fundraise. Like I said, media gets clicks when it's a scary headline. So I think fear has become a tool for attention, and attention, once you have someone's attention, you can get their money. And so I think everyone needs to take a bit of a breath and realize that in America, there will always be a community that supports you somewhere. I live in a red state, Missouri, which has passed some of the most draconian laws about gender affirming care, for example. Yet we have Kansas City, Missouri, where I live, that has declared itself a sanctuary city. People can't write off the entire red state when you have places like Kansas City that are incredibly progressive and working really hard and really welcoming. And sometimes I see people writing off a state and ignoring individual local communities. So that's your first question. And then your second question is, how tribalistic is America? Well, get this, and please disagree with anything I'm saying. If you're like, I don't know if I trust what this guy has to say, please push back. These are all just my sort of unfiltered, unvarnished thoughts. But tribalism looks quite different these days because every single day we are given something new to be tribalistic about. Think about it. There is some new, usually an issue that doesn't matter. Sometimes it is definitely an issue that matters, but some controversy that we need to take a side in. And it could be the Barbie movie. It could be a policy in your state. It could be whether or not you agree with kneeling for the national anthem at a football game. It could be, should it be a hate crime to use the wrong pronouns? So every single day, there's something new that we feel obligated to have an opinion on. And when our opinion does not fall with the traditional binary left-right perspectives, then we start thinking, hang on, am I actually on the other side? Am I actually a completely different party? So the tribes shift so quickly because we are constantly being fed a diet of we have to tribe ourselves into particular issues. And Americans, if this is the dividing line, again, from my experience, if this is the dividing line, and these are the issues on the left and the right, most Americans usually have some overlap where they are not down the line on everything. But Americans prioritize their issues differently. And I think one of the biggest issues, and I think something that's contributing to people being driven to the right, is when they have an overlap or they fall out of line and they feel like, well, I'm not all the way down, so I must not be a part of this party. Or on the right, when people disagree with one thing, Liz Cheney, where they are kicked out for not towing the line or speaking their mind too much. Americans as a whole, from my experience traveling across the country, have very complicated, sometimes contradictory views when we look at it through the red and blue binary. So the tribalism is always shifting and always asking people to reconsider where they stand and where they feel about issues. And sometimes it's very important for us to reconsider how we feel about certain issues. But the Barbie movie, maybe not so much. Good movie, though.
I'm going to hand it back to Valerie. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I personally have a million questions, but I do not want to do all the talking. I'd love to first introduce the No Place for Hate members on the call. If folks could just go ahead and turn their cameras on for a moment and give a wave. Thank you. Thank you. So these are the members of our No Place for Hate Committee in Hull. And then I also would love to hear from members of this community here. and encourage folks to go ahead and raise your hand and chime in to ask questions yourselves. And there are a couple of ways, like I said at the beginning of the call, you can go ahead and use your little reaction, raise your hand icon, or you can actually physically put your hand up, but then your camera must be on. I do see a hand up from Sandy.
And Sandy, before we get into your question, I just want to remind everyone that I will be turning this back on you. So the 3 questions are: what is something you have changed your mind about? What is something you would be open to changing your mind about? What is something you could never change your mind about? And just keep that in the back of your head as you're asking questions. But Sandy, let's hear it.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks so much for joining us. I was curious in your travels if you spoke with a number of various ethnic groups and what kinds of reactions you got from them in terms of why you were doing this, or what were you looking for something, or just there's so many different people that live in this country, and how much exposure did you have to that?
Great. So the question is, did I speak to multiple ethnic groups? And the answer is no. I only spoke to Portuguese people. I'm just kidding. No, a real point of my book, and this was how I was making sure that I wasn't getting one picture of America, was to talk to someone unlike someone I had met before. So that could be a socioeconomic background, that could be racial backgrounds, religious backgrounds. And I really feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong after you read the book, I think I got most of the, I got a portrait of America that represents America from the people I talked to across the country. I went to an all-Black bar in the most dangerous area of Cleveland. I talked to Asian immigrants in, New York. I talked to the absentee Shawnee tribe governor in Oklahoma. And I was constantly trying to push myself to meet different types of people to get an accurate portrait of America. I went to Bernie rallies, I went to Trump rallies. I was really always trying to find a blind spot and then talking to people from that particular group. And I think to answer your question, what reactions did I get from different ethnic groups when they heard what I was doing? I think one of the most beautiful things for me, and one of the things I've gotten a lot of pushback on, not a lot, but every once in a while, there's the question of like, well, of course you can be optimistic about America. You're white. Of course you can. And I do have a lot of privilege, and I talk about that in my book. There's a chapter where I almost get murdered in a town called Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. And I ignored all the red flags of 2 men trying to murder me and my friend. And I told it to my friends who were women of color, or women or people of color, or women of color. And they were like, what is wrong with you? You didn't see any of these red flags. You have the privilege to be stupid. And I bring that up because that is something that's very much a part of this. And so I really want to highlight in the books, when I spoke to a member of the Congressional Black Caucus in Tennessee, for example, and I'm going through the South, he says to me, I don't want you to walk away from the South without a knowledge of the history, without a knowledge of the moral arc of the universe bending towards justice, but there still being bad actors and there still being danger out there. So I really want to curate those points of view that push back on what is an overall optimistic message in the book. And so that was not always the feedback I got, but I thought it was very important feedback to get, because the reason I feel so optimistic, and this sort of spoils the end of the book, is the ability for communities to have conversation, for communities to get together and make change. So the takeaway is that we have the power. All of us have the power to make a positive impact, and it's never to minimize the experiences, especially of people that have been marginalized. But I very much want to keep that perspective in the forefront of the book.
Thank you, Ryan. I have another question from the audience. have you gone to a Trump rally? And if so, where?
A great question. And I think this is maybe one of the most interesting chapters of the book and a bit of a turning point in the book for me. I went to one in Cleveland. I had gone to Cleveland on the trip, and I was in New York City, and I learned about this Trump rally. It was days before the election. And I was just like, I've been on this trip for about 3 or 4 weeks. I've spoken to the Christine Todd Whitman Republicans, right? I've not spoken to, it was hard for me to find a Trump Republican outside of a few college Republican groups. So I ended up going, and it was a fascinating experience, and one that I think is one of the most multifaceted and complicated experiences. And I almost want to just direct you to read the chapter yourself because of the surprisingness of it. Because I know if I try to boil it down to a quick answer, I'll miss some nuance, but I'll try anyway. Basically what happens, and I'll just tease this, I went undercover. I was in New York, and I walked by a store where they were selling Make America Great Again hats. And I was like, well, is this a sign or what? I bought one. I put on a flannel. I put on a leather jacket, as the panelist or the moderator at the World Affairs Council said. I butched myself up a little bit. I was like, what do you mean by that? Excuse you. And I went by myself. And I was standing in line, and these 4 women in their 40s or 50s started talking to me and asking me questions. And you could tell they were a little suspicious of me. Where are you from? New York. Is this your first rally? Yeah. What do you like about Trump? He tells it like it is. I don't know. They knew something was up. So they ended up taking a picture with me, and they asked what my name was. And I said, Ryan Bernsten. And they looked me up on Facebook to tag me in the picture, and saw that my place of work was still listed as Hillary Clinton for America. They looked at me. I looked at them. Buy the book to learn more. I was caught going undercover at a Trump rally as a Hillary flunky. And what happened after was fascinating.
I look forward to that answer.
Yes. I'll just sort of expand we've seen people like the good liars that go to Trump rallies and make fun of people. That is very much not the spirit of my book. And that was not what I was there to do. I was there to observe. So that is not what happens. I do not go to humiliate or poke fun at. I was very much along for the ride wherever I went.
Ryan, could you share a little bit about where you grew up?
Yes. Okay. So this is a huge piece of the book for me. I wanted to avoid talking about myself at all costs. I do not want to talk about myself. I wanted to hold democracy at an arm's distance. But the biggest factor of how people feel about politics and democracy is their upbringing. And once you hear the story of someone's upbringing, you start to understand their worldview quite a bit better. So I'll just give you a quick recap that I grew up in Rockford, Illinois, which is the #3 most miserable city, according to Forbes, when I lived there in 2010, right behind Flint and Detroit. When I was in high school, the unemployment rate was 17.2%. Factories were closing. There were a lot of people out of jobs. And my favorite place in my town, the only place that I really felt I belonged and had community, was New American Theater, which closed down during the recession. So I very much learned that when people don't show up for their community institutions, when we don't put in the work, that we lose these things. So that is very much my driving force. It's why I love the Midwest. It's why I care so much about community building. It's why I believe the arts is a tool for positive development and empathetic conversation. So that's where I came from, very much Midwest, Rust Belt town, and then went to school at Northwestern, moved to the coastal cities, Oxford in the UK, and then eventually on this trip came to Kansas City, Missouri, where I'd never been before, and totally fell in love with it. And I've been living here for the past 4 years.
Thank you, Ryan. I have one more question from David Kellum.
Yeah.
David, you need to unmute.
I knew that.
David, I love the space you're in. It's just open and it looks like you're on the water.
That is actually Hull behind me. It's a screensaver, but it's right out my window. So I'm very, very blessed.
I'm going there.
All right. Well, anytime if you want to come over for wine and a conversation, feel free.
Yeah.
So here's my question. I am fascinated with what's happened with the state of Georgia and the purpling of Georgia, the contrast between some of the progressive action that's happening there, the legal things that are happening there, and the historic politics and culture. What I'm wondering, so you said tonight was that the biggest I guess agent or catalyst for people changing their minds is conversation. In states like Georgia and in other purpling or purple states, are conversations happening, or are we having a battle between perspectives that and it's more of a fight than a conversation? I'm trying to get a sense of the dynamic there and in other similar states.
Oh yeah, what an amazing, very specific question. I think there's a few things going on in Georgia. And again, I'm not the Georgia expert, so there could be misinformation of what I'm saying. But from what I believe, so many young people are flocking to Atlanta. They're flocking to Savannah. They're flocking to Athens, which is, I think, where the university is. So it's a big draw for people as well. Okay. When people do that and they stay in their town and they're like, okay, well, I'm safe here. I don't want to go out and go to the Milledgevilles, the smaller communities across the state. That's where it becomes a battle. But what I'm seeing is, and if we actually look at the way Georgia has voted in statewide elections, we've elected John Ossoff, Raphael Warnock, President Biden, Brian Kemp, who was primaried by David Perdue, who was a sort of revenge candidate for Kemp certifying the 2020 elections. So it seems that the state is purple, but that there are nuances to how people vote. I don't know about turnout. That's why I'm saying I don't want to say something out of turn that's not true, but it feels like people can kind of have a conversation there. And hopefully it's not just people holding up in the cities, but there is a kind of push and pull there. Democrats who live in Georgia can tolerate living under Brian Kemp. And, it seems Republicans by a very narrow margin didn't come out for President Trump in 2020. So I think Georgia is going to be a very interesting state to watch. And you actually see, I think Stacey Abrams won by more votes, lost by a narrower margin in 2018 than she did in 2022, which is before all of this Georgia turning blue events happened. So I think it remains to be seen, but I think the more people are in a purple state and the more pollination there is with a town. I talk about Milledgeville because I go there in the book, where it's just this sleepy little town where it actually was, I think, host to the nation's largest insane asylum that shut down in the 70s and now is sort of this dark stain on this otherwise quaint town. And these people are desperate to lure talent there from the bigger cities. I talked to someone who said, my grandparents grew up here, my parents grew up here, I want my kids to live here. And so I think when there is the purpling of a state, when people are already living in Georgia, and the more people in Milledgeville who might be more conservative see that it behooves them to make connections with people in the bigger cities and say, come live here, this is a great place to live, all are welcome if you have ideas and opportunities. it becomes an economic exchange of ideas. And that's when you're more likely to sit down at the local craft beer and taco place, which exists in Milledgeville, and be able to have some of these conversations about, I don't know, was the election stolen? Is Biden too old? And that's where I think you get the push and pull of a purple state that can't be easily boxed in. And I think that's exciting.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Appreciate that perspective.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Looks like we have another question for you here. You refer to the book from Albright on fascism. What did you glean from her writing?
Oh, it's such a good book. It is such a wonderful book. And I would almost say Madeleine Albright's Fascism: A Warning, 50 States of Mind, like almost read, like this is more important for you to read than my book. The thing I learned is it's actually, first of all, fascism is very hard to pin down what it is. What does fascism mean? And it is thrown around like it's a silly string, just fascism by the right, by the left. We just love to use the word fascism. And Madeleine Albright, who I don't know if everyone knows, she was the Secretary of State under Clinton's second administration. She was born in the Czech Republic under communist rule, or no, during World War II, and then immigrated to America. So she just has this very nuanced, interesting view of what fascism is, and talks about it from the Nazis to Stalin to Mao to Venezuela, and just sort of the different complications of what fascism looks like. The thing that was of most interest to me is what fascists like to do. What do they like to do? What are the warnings? And they like to demonize and mischaracterize people, and they like to shut down conversation. They like to get people to stop talking. So it sort of seems like we're in a really fertile ground for fascism when we fall into the traps of those are bad people, let's dehumanize them, and stop talking to certain people. It's way easier to do that. It's so easy, and sometimes it feels so nice. It's hard work to have difficult conversations and humble yourself a little bit, but that is my big takeaway. And she talks about the dangers of fascism in America when dialogue at the top, especially from politicians, we know who's particularly guilty of it, dehumanizes political opponents and wants to simplify issues into binary choices. You're either a patriot or a communist. And ultimately, the onus, this is something I learned from this book as well, the onus for fascism taking over a country, it's not on the people at the top. It's on us. We ultimately will fall for it or take the bait. We can hold each other accountable. We can fall into our partisan tribes. We can stop talking, or we can fight back against it. And I think, personally, one of the things that's happened in the past few years is the conversation has been shut down in so many ways. And when people feel the conversation is shut down, or they can't actually speak their mind without being afraid of getting canceled, or they can't air their grievances, they tend to say, well, I must be a Trump supporter. I must be like, and so it's very complicated, the traps that are set that look like a fertile ground for fascism, basically. So those are the two big takeaways, that it's the warning signs are demonizing your opponents and shutting down conversation in very simplistic language.
Ryan, we thought it might be a good time now to have you put your 3 questions back to the audience here, if you would like to.
Valerie, we're on the same wavelength. I was feeling the turn. So I'm going to turn this conversation back to you. And again, this is my favorite part of these talks. Don't let me down. So the first question is, what is something you have changed your mind on? The second is, what is something you are open to changing your mind on? And the third is, what is something you would never change your mind on? So I know they're big questions, And it doesn't have to be a big answer. It can be like, I used to not like pickles and now I like pickles, or I used to think pit bulls were dangerous, now I have a pit bull. I used to believe that we shouldn't have children, now we have children. Anything like that.
Go ahead and put your hand up, or you may type something into the chat and we can post anonymously. The school teacher and me allows for a little bit of wait time.
As there should be.
It looks like someone has shared that they are open to changing their mind about affirmative action not being needed anymore. If I don't know if that person would like to elaborate at all, or maybe that's okay not to. I'm seeing that we have someone in the chat stating that they cannot accept white supremacy.
I'm with you there.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that.
Not good.
I can share that I do believe a woman has a right to her own body and any choices that have to do with her own body.
Just because there's some space here, do you have a line? Are you like, this is the week, or it's up to birth? Do you have like, my question is, do you think there's a consensus that could ever happen federally?
See, I'm so at the point where I don't think the federal government should have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
It shouldn't even be on the, it shouldn't be up for debate at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I haven't even let myself even go there. But as I'm looking in the chat and hoping for more folks to, I see Paula's hand is up. I just wanted to say that I think the last question, something that we're not willing to change our mind about, is so much easier to answer than the first two questions.
Mm.
I do see Paula's hand up.
I've been giving this a lot of thought, and I feel like it's very difficult for me to accept certain policies in this country, particularly one about the lack of universal health care in this country. And certainly working towards, maybe not in my lifetime, but maybe at some point we would have it. And wondering, as I talk to people who question that and the viability of it and who deserves healthcare, who doesn't, it's quite a push and pull.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That is really one of my favorite topics. Because I went to school in England, and the one thing I heard from my very international cohort of people, I had people from Zimbabwe, people from Mexico, people from Southeast Asia who were in my program, and they all said, gosh, I'd love to live in America, but I cannot worry about whether or not I can get healthcare because I'm working at a bookshop. I can't do that. Just their mindset and the fact that healthcare is not even on their radar as something they have to worry about is something that's very staggering and eye-opening to me, where that's such a way of life here. And I always wonder, where is I know Romney Care, we look at Romney Care happening in Massachusetts. The states are laboratories of democracy, that then we saw Romney Care happen. And then we got the Affordable Care Act, the healthcare exchange. I hope someday a state, I know Vermont's been trying to do it, California is trying to do it, that we can have a lot of different templates for what universal healthcare could look like, because it doesn't need to be one size fits all. Wisconsin's healthcare system, Badger Care, would look very different than Texas's healthcare system. or Wyoming's healthcare system, or I don't know, southern healthcare system. So yeah.
Thank you.
I'm checking the chat here. I'm seeing some folks sharing that they've changed their mind about the death penalty from thinking it was sometimes warranted to not. And then it looks like maybe an opposing view. I'm open to changing my mind about capital punishment. I am and have always been against it. Someone has shared, I've changed my mind about pronouns. I used to think they weren't a big deal, but my daughter and her peers have educated me. Shared, I'm not open to changing my mind about systemic racism and whether it exists in America. Oh, I see another hand up from Celia.
Hi, I wasn't planning on saying anything, but these questions are really interesting. So in my line of work, I work on voting rights. And so one thing that kind of wasn't on my radar, but I'm finding I feel very strongly about, so I'm going to put it in the bucket of won't change my mind about, is I think absolutely felons should have the right to vote. And I think currently incarcerated people should have the right to vote. And I think it's incredibly important because punishing someone by removing them from society is just going to make it more difficult for them to trust the system and to re-enter society. So that's why the more I think about it, the more I think, that's not a way that we should punish people.
I love that, Celia. There's actually two people I talked to in the book in Pennsylvania and Ohio who are formerly incarcerated or have lost their right to vote. And that's it's a very interesting topic and one that I'm able to discuss in depth with those two people. So thank you for your work on that.
Looking in the audience for some more hands.
There's
And-
one more question somebody sent me. I can share. They asked me if I would ask Ryan what he feels is a successful way to integrate tribes within communities. And they go on to comment that it seems, I think, but don't know, that groups like No Place for Hate and Hull only include like-minded people. How do we attract more people to join in a call like this who don't think the same? Can using the word hate in the name of the group turn people off, perhaps?
Oh,
It's
that's
a
so
lot there.
yeah. Let me tell you why everything you're doing is wrong. Yeah, your name's wrong. No, but the word hate is very interesting because, like I mentioned earlier, it can mean different things. People can be wary of it, right? It's like, okay, what do they mean by hate? People are like free speech, hate. Where's the line? And I just personal sharing. I work for an organization called the Trevor Project, which is a nonprofit aimed at suicide prevention for LGBTQ young people. And one of our things that I think we do very successfully is we reach out to adults who maybe have trans children, who maybe have friends who are LGBTQ, and we say to them, you don't have to be perfect. You're allowed to make mistakes. You are allowed to change your mind. And I think this idea of no place for hate can be a really welcoming message. No place for hate, it means you can't make a mistake with us. We will not hate you. We encourage you to grow. And one of the most beautiful things for me that we saw in one of our videos that happy to share, it's a documentary called Learn with Love, where it was a father and his trans daughter, and we invited his father, the grandfather, who had not spoken to his family in years and years and years, I think maybe 6 years, because he didn't agree with the granddaughter being trans. And in real time, we watched this grandfather go from, I don't know if I want anything to do with this, this is wrong, hate, to spending time with his granddaughter, and ultimately breaking down in tears and saying, what a waste. What a waste the last 6 years have been. What a waste of time that I could have had with my family. And they ended up reconciling. And I think the idea of hate for people, that could look like hate, what Tom, the grandfather, originally felt. That could be hate. But that we can turn hate into love, and we can turn hate into love and acceptance. It's just a very interesting nuance of making people feel like you can grow, you can make mistakes, you are not defined by what you previously thought. We're not here to change your mind. We're here to ask you to consider new perspectives. And by the same token, to allow you to share your perspectives and allow us to grow as well. So what advice do I have? What I say all this, how is this relevant? I think expanding the places you go to meet new people, going to unexpected places with no place for hate. I don't know why a biker convention is popping into my head. I don't know why. That maybe it's because I was at a wedding recently and the hotel was filled with bikers from a biker convention. But what would happen if No Place for Hate set up a tent at a bikers convention and started some conversations? I'm pretty sure something interesting would come out of that. Maybe someone's mind would be changed. Maybe you'd have a new member. Maybe you'd have a conversation you didn't expect. And I think it really comes down to why I find this work so exciting is you just never know. You never know if people can change. You never know if just one conversation can flip people to having a new perspective. Sorry, I just saw that in the chat. That was, I was like, yes, I don't know if you want to share that one. That kind of caught my attention.
Sure. Somebody would like to know, would not change my mind about, in the most positive way, people should have the right to die as well as to live. So I think that maybe that has to do with assisted,
Yes.
I don't even want to, assisted suicide, perhaps.
And thank you for clearing that, Celia, because I was like, Celia's doing all the work here. Celia has all the thoughts, all the opinion. No, I know these are shared from multiple people anonymously. Yeah.
Paula?
Can I just, I'd like to clarify, that wasn't mine, but there's something in Massachusetts that I'm also working on called medical care and dying. And there's legislation about being able to give people who are terminally ill 6 months to live, verified by a doctor. I mean, all the safeguards. Oregon has had it for many, many years, and we're in the middle of educating people about that. So I just wanted to, I don't know if that person was referring to that, but I want to change the narrative about the words that we use, and it's really medical care and dying. And maybe that person wasn't talking about that, but it gave me the opportunity to put that out. Thank you.
It's great work, Paula. Thank you for doing that. I met with a woman when I was in New Mexico who actually illegally had her husband participate in doctor-assisted suicide in the home. Incidentally, she said, "You know that couch you're sleeping on? That's where my husband died after I'd slept there for 2 nights." So, you know, go figure. Maybe that wasn't the best way to tell me, but it was a very emotional experience. She cooked me and my friend who I was traveling with a lovely chicken dinner, and then told us the whole story about saying goodbye to her husband on the couch that I was sleeping on. And we were just tears rolling down our cheeks. It was a really beautiful story, but she had to be very cagey about it. I didn't use her name in the book. I didn't use a lot of real names in the book, but because it was illegal, but she wanted her husband to die with some dignity.
I'm curious. We'll go back to what we changed your mind about in a minute. How did you determine whose houses you were going to be sleeping at? How did that happen?
Well, talk about having an optimistic perspective of America. America saved my butt. because I got such a small grant from Oxford that I could not have stayed in hotels across the country. So I put out a please help me on social media. And I say a lot of bad things about social media in these talks because it creates a polarized perspective, but it's a very good way to connect with people for in-person conversations, or if you're taking a trip to all 50 states and need a place to stay. So a lot of people would say, I don't know if I can host you because I live in New York, but my aunt lives in West Virginia and is installing solar panels on the roofs of houses, and you've got to go talk to her. She's an amazing change maker. And then I'd be in West Virginia and I'd stay with the aunt. You've got to stay with my sister. She's in the most amazing community in Leesburg, Virginia. And then I'd go to a play that someone got me free tickets for, and they'd say, there is the most amazing theater company in Anchorage, Alaska. You've got to go stay with them and talk to them. So it really became this people connecting me to other people. And it was really special in that way. And, sometimes people were very wary of me. They were like, who is this person that I'm letting into my house? But for the most part, I eventually, they came around on me. I charmed them by the end. Celia, your opinion on mushrooms being gross. I have changed my mind on that. So I have hope that maybe you can as well. And it's just very interesting. And I always ask, what's something you can't change your mind about? Because I think it should be very clear when we're having conversations with people and trying to change their mind, whether there's a point to it, whether people are actually open to having their minds changed. And I sometimes ask when I'm having political conversations, are you willing to change your mind on this? Is this worth my time? Is there any information I can give you that can make you think differently about this? And if the answer is no, it's not worth our time. But those issues are rather few and far between. I think people have different answers for each thing. So people say, what's the point if someone will never change their mind on B? I'm like, you can't always win on A, B, C, D, and E. But if you can win on A, C, D, and E, and B is left, then that's a lot more work than just letting that person disagree with you on all of those things. So I think that's a really important part of it, that tenacity moves the needle. We're not trying to get everything we want. We're not going to get everything we want. We're not going to get people to think like us. But that's compromise, and that is how democracy works, and something that's hopefully a perfect segue to what Stephen's about to ask.
Go ahead, Stephen. You can unmute yourself.
I think I am. Can you hear me now?
Perfectly.
You're good. So let's get back to you. So you took a journey. You wrote a book. You discovered hope in America. Is that what we could say? You discovered hope in America. You tell me what changed in your mind. So as in the individual locations you found, you did, but as a whole, as a single concept, one nation under God, as we like to say,
Yeah. Well, I always say that communities are microcosms of democracy, and I had never thought about it that way. I feel like the news media tells us one story, and that is the one story of democracy. It's Trump at the trial today. It's the chaos in the speaker's race. Those are the stories we're told of democracy. And I think going back to Alexis de Tocqueville, exploring America on the ground, and that was what was so novel about what he was doing. He wasn't just talking to leaders in power, people who are decision makers. He's going around to understand the American experience. And one of the things he said is, Americans are always forming associations. We're always forming clubs. We're always gathering. And I think that is one of the most perilous junctures that we're at right now, because we're not showing up the way we used to. Robert Putnam wrote his book, Bowling Alone, about how we're not showing up for our bowling leagues. We're not showing up for our PTA's meetings. We're not showing up and volunteering in our kids' schools. We're not showing up for galas and functions and just getting out in our community and making a difference, because there are billions of dollars in our economy that are just driven by volunteer work. And I think the biggest choice for us right now is, are we going to participate in those associations? Are we going to remind ourselves that democracy is not a spectator sport, and that doesn't just mean voting? It's what, you know, Paula is doing, going out and advocating. Are we going to show up and make those changes to be involved? So that's where the hope comes from and where the warning comes from for me. Like, I'm hopeful in America because I see those things happening even when our government is dysfunctional. I see those things happening on the ground to make change, even when these headlines are in the news. And I think if all of us start to participate more and see that things aren't always as bad as we're told, we start to become a little less scared. We start to trust people a little more. And then when we hear these doom and gloom stories from our national politicians about our democracy and how America's falling apart, we'll start to believe it less, because we'll say, you know what? My community is actually doing really well, and it's almost offensive that you can say America's in decline, because we are working hard every day to make where we live better. And that's what I saw across the country.
Excellent, excellent. As a follow-up, if I may, have you heard anything about the blue zone idea?
Is that where people eat a certain way?
No, it's where the people live the longest.
Live the longest, but it's based on their diet and their community and their
and all of the values that you were talking about. It's all part of it. I just curious if you knew about it, because you seem to be a worldly kind of person. So thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for this this evening.
Yes,
really delightful.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Ryan. It's great to hear your different perspectives. I have one more question from the audience for you. Where did you go in California? It's a big state, and South and North are very different. And what was your experience like in the state?
Okay. I went a few places. I went to Oceano. I don't know if that makes sense. It's near Pismo Beach. And I went to the Great American Vaudeville Theater, which is this amazing theater where I saw Steel Magnolias, and they have sing-alongs with the audience, and then the actors are pouring you beer during intermission. And it's one of the great American traditions that I really love, the theater, but also vaudeville. So I went there. I went to Los Angeles. I interviewed a sex worker in Los Angeles. I went to Monterey. I didn't have much to say about Monterey. I went to, it was just so nice, and I was just kind of driving through. Went to Sacramento and saw the lovely Victorian houses. Went to San Francisco and went couch surfing, believe it or not, with a nudist, which was in the Tenderloin district. I don't know if that rings any bells for people, but that is a story that you have to read to believe, because that was one of the more harrowing experiences for my trip. But I love California. I used to live in Los Angeles out of college, and it's a great state. And it's almost too beautiful for me to deserve to live there as a person from the Midwest.
So for those of us looking at the chat, there are many links that we've included tonight, including several places where we can purchase Ryan's book. We love having conversations like this on our committee. We do event each year called Feast of Conversations, where we come up with a topic of conversation and then sit down together with people in the community and discuss whatever that topic may be, and with the whole goal being that we are simply talking with one another and building community that way. We invite the public. Our meetings are open meetings, so anyone is welcome to join us. And you can find our meetings announced on the town website here in Hull. Our next meeting's on November 16th. I'm sorry, Thursday, November 17th. My apologies. Paula, I see your hand up, so I will stop talking for a moment.
Thank you. First of all, Ryan, you never disappoint. You inspired me in the Hingham Library and here as well. I do want to make a plug for Hull. As an ex-New York City gal, I don't know if anybody could tell by my accent, but I've been in Hull for 15 years. And I will say, for a community of almost 11,000 people, it's amazing the amount of energy and the variety of people that volunteer and are involved. Our town meetings are lively and very inclusive and try to be respectful. People really work at that. And having grown up in more of an anonymous way in New York City, to have a community that really embraces all kinds of people. We would like to be more diverse here in Hull. One of the things that No Place for Hate would really want to do is reach out and welcome more people into our community. Part of our community also has a state beach. So we have a lot of people coming in from all around Boston as well. So I wanted to personally thank Ryan, and I'll let Valerie take over and bring it to a close, but perhaps you have one last thought or closing that you'd like to leave with us. Thank you, Ryan.
I have a couch here. If you ever want to couch surf in the town of Hull, you are welcome. Ryan, any last words before we sign off tonight?
I just want to thank all of you. This is such a dream for me to be able to hear from you, to talk to you. And these are the meetings that give me faith in America. When people ask, why am I so optimistic? I point to what's going on right here. So I just encourage you to get off of social media, get out in your community, volunteer, meet people, have conversations. And my big takeaway that I always say to people, and this might sound harder than traveling to all 50 states, it's if there is someone who you've broken with because of politics, someone reasonable, obviously not your local neighborhood extremist, but a friend or a family member, I always encourage you to reach out to them and see if you can have that conversation and see if there is something that you could say, I see your point about that, because the greatest asset we have in this life, the greatest currency, is our relationships. And when I watch the people dividing us, fracturing those relationships, it breaks my heart. And I don't want to let them win. So I've heard stories at libraries and nonprofits and universities across the country about situations like this, where I don't talk to my brother anymore, or my best friend and I don't speak because of politics. I would like to give you a message of hope that change is possible, and that when we learn how to have a conversation from a humble perspective, that we can salvage those relationships, and we can, end up having a more constructive, collaborative view on our democracy. So thank you so much for having me. I'm such a huge fan of the work you're doing, and thank you all for doing what we all need to do, which is show up.
And with that, we'd like everybody to show up right in this very moment to turn on your cameras so we can take a quick Snapchat if ever having trouble pronouncing my words for some reason. Turn on your cameras, show yourselves, say hello, and we will take a nice screenshot. It's also very enjoyable to see everybody's cats and dogs.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was wonderful, Ryan. Thank you very much, all of you.
Oh, thank you, Jackie.
So nice to see everybody. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks for having me, everybody.
Wonderful, thank
I
you.
wonder where he was coming from.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Good night, all. It's been a
Thanks,
pleasure.
everybody. Wish I could have been here from the beginning.
Oh, sorry, Virginia. We'll have a recording of this.
Can I ask right now, is Rhoda back here or not?
No, as far as
Not
we know,
yet.
she's still in Israel. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but anyway, okay. Have a good evening, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
too,
Thanks,
Virginia. Thank you
Virginia.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.